So, with regard to applications and just general workload security, when we look at our end users' mobile devices, raise your hands if you use a personal device for work. I'm sure many of you are raising your hands right now. And when we think about our personal applications that might reside on our devices, we might have things that have access to our speakers or headphones or microphones. And sure, they might have access to some of our cameras as well. And sometimes when we think about the things that we implement either in the workplace or sometimes even at home, our firewalls can only do so much. They might be able to protect against certain applications, or when we have traffic coming in and we are running a VPN client locally on that device. But we also have to think that security is supposed to be implemented in the design stage of our applications. So a lot of things that they want us to sort of think about in this particular section is, our app developers are going to be using libraries. And sure, those libraries should and many times are validated by our white hat hackers, right? But these libraries also can sometimes be digitally signed to ensure things like code integrity. And so when we are looking into these applications that we might be using for work, we have to make sure that our developers are following good security practices, and that if there is a library that's affected by a vulnerability, that library is indeed updated and should assist in patching of the vulnerabilities. Now, as one of the mechanisms that we're going to look at in some of the future topics, we do have some public cloud monitoring that might help in some of these areas. So sure, we've talked about, physical security and where and how to implement things like our firewalls and our next-gen firewalls. But when it comes to things like StealthWatch, we have the ability to analyze some of the SaaS applications that we might be using. So again, we'll cover some of this a little bit more later, but the Cisco StealthWatch Cloud allows us to be able to integrate with cloud environments that might be on-prem or that might be, public or private cloud. Even with Kubernetes deployments, we can have a master node that basically integrates or communicates with all of our lightweight sensors that are deployed on those Kubernetes nodes. And then StealthWatch does its thing where it starts to monitor, it creates a baseline, and then it tries to detect any anomalies. All right, so it allows us to do this either container to container or pod to pod. So there are some examples of where we might be deploying this, as far as in the cloud. When we look at just some terms that some of you might already be familiar with, we take development, we take operations, and we get DevOps. DevOps was put together for quicker deployment times, uses microservices instead of those big monolithic large pieces of code. And the benefit to those microservices is that we have lots of small pieces of code that run independently of one another. But we do also start to introduce a lot more APIs. So those APIs are increasing, which overall gives us, a vaster attack surface if we have more APIs. So, there's pros and cons to microservices. So that eventually led to the, security along with the DevOps. So our SecDevOps should always be proactive. They should be security testing at the very beginning. It should be part of that release process, and it should continually occur during testing. So many of you are already familiar with the Devnet or developer.cisco.com. This is a great place where you can get a lot of additional information on DevOps and SecDevOps. So there's learning tracks and sandboxes and places where you can go to exchange code information. Any developers that need to access any existing APIs for IoT devices or for our data center platform or for networking, and of course security, we can find all of that here in our DevNet section.